The prince had everything a young man could desire. He lived in a grand palace with high marble walls, golden doors, and long corridors that echoed with every step. From his earliest childhood, servants surrounded him day and night. They dressed him, fed him, cleaned his rooms, and fulfilled his smallest wishes before he even spoke them aloud. Because of this, the prince grew up believing that obedience was natural and that respect was something he deserved simply because of his title. Each morning, the servants lined up silently as the prince walked past them. Some bowed their heads, others kept their eyes low. The prince rarely noticed their faces. To him, they were part of the palace, like the pillars or the curtains. If his food was late, he scolded them. If his clothes were not perfect, he punished them. He believed fear was the best way to maintain order. Among the servants was an old man named Rahim. He had served the royal family for more than 40 years. His back was bent with age, and his hair was white, but his eyes were calm and thoughtful. Unlike the others, Rahim did not fear the prince deeply. He respected him, but he also understood life beyond the palace walls. Whenever the prince shouted, Rahim listened quietly and continued his work with patience. One afternoon, the prince decided he was bored with palace life. He complained that everything felt the same every day. Hearing this, the king suggested that the prince should learn more about responsibility. The king ordered that the prince would travel to a nearby province for a few days, but without royal comfort. Only a few servants would go with him, and he would live like an ordinary traveler. The prince disliked the idea, but he could not refuse his father. The next morning, he left the palace with a small group of servants, including Rahim. They rode horses through dusty roads and small villages. For the first time, the prince saw people working under the hot sun, carrying heavy loads, and smiling despite their tired faces. Still, he said nothing. That night, they stayed at a modest inn. The room was small, the bed was hard, and the food was simple. The prince complained constantly. He blamed the servants for his discomfort and ordered them to fix things that were beyond their control. Rahim listened and gently said that comfort was not always guaranteed in the real world. The prince ignored him. The next day, disaster struck. As they crossed a narrow forest path, bandits attacked them. In the chaos, the prince was separated from his guards. His horse ran wildly and threw him to the ground. When he stood up, dizzy and frightened, the bandits were gone, but so were his companions. For the first time in his life, the prince was completely alone. Hours passed as he wandered through the forest. His fine clothes tore on branches, and his hands ached from pushing bushes aside. Hunger and fear filled his mind. He called for help, but only birds answered. As evening approached, he finally saw a small hut near the edge of the forest. An old woman opened the door. She looked at the prince's torn clothes and tired face. Without asking who he was, she invited him inside and gave him bread and water. The prince ate silently, realizing how grateful he felt for such simple kindness. That night, he slept on the floor, exhausted but safe. The next morning, he offered the woman a gold ring as payment. She smiled and refused. She said kindness was not something to be bought. Her words stayed with him as he continued his journey. After another long day of walking, the prince finally met his servants. They were worried and relieved to see him alive. Rahim stepped forward and bowed deeply, but his eyes showed genuine concern, not fear. At that moment, the prince felt something new. He felt ashamed. On the return journey, the prince changed. He no longer shouted orders. He listened. When a servant was tired, he waited. When food was simple, he accepted it with thanks. He asked Rahim questions about his life, his family, and his years of service. Rahim spoke honestly, describing hard work, loss, and quiet joy. When they returned to the palace, everyone noticed the difference. The prince greeted servants by looking at them, not past them. He thanked them for their work. Punishments became rare, replaced by fairness. The servants worked not out of fear anymore, but out of respect. One evening, the prince stood on the palace balcony and watched the servants below, moving through their daily tasks. He understood now that leadership was not about power, but responsibility. True respect was earned through humility and kindness, not demanded through fear. From that day on, the prince ruled not as a master above others, but as a leader among them. And the servants, seeing his change, served him with loyalty that no command could ever force. The palace woke before sunrise, but the prince was already awake. He lay on his soft bed, staring at the decorated ceiling, feeling an emptiness he could not explain. Everything he owned was perfect, yet nothing satisfied him. Servants moved quietly through his chambers, opening curtains, preparing clothes, and arranging breakfast. The prince barely acknowledged them. To him, service was expected, not appreciated. That morning, the prince ordered his servants to prepare for a journey. He wanted to visit a distant royal estate to escape his boredom. The servants hurried to obey. Among them was Rahim, the same elderly servant who had served the royal family for decades. Rahim moved slowly but carefully, checking supplies and calming the younger servants. He understood the prince's moods better than anyone. The journey began with comfort and confidence. The prince rode at the front, proud and demanding. Whenever the pace slowed, he complained. Whenever a servant made a mistake, he scolded them sharply. The road stretched through fields and villages, but the prince saw only inconvenience, not beauty. By the third day, dark clouds filled the sky. A storm broke suddenly, soaking the travelers and turning the road into thick mud. One of the wagons got stuck. The prince shouted in anger, blaming the servants for the delay. While the younger servants struggled, Rahim stepped forward and calmly organized them. Together, they freed the wagon, though their clothes were ruined and their hands bruised. That night, they camped under wet tents. The prince's fire kept going out, and his food tasted cold and bland. Furious, he accused the servants of incompetence. Rahim listened patiently and then spoke in a quiet voice. He said that nature did not obey royal orders, and neither did hardship. The prince turned away, refusing to listen, but the words echoed in his mind. The next morning, they reached a small town. While passing through the market, the prince noticed something unusual. A servant had dropped a bag of coins, and before anyone noticed, a poor boy picked it up and returned it honestly. The prince was surprised. He had always believed that power controlled behavior, yet here was honesty without fear. Later that day, the prince decided to explore the town alone. He left his guards behind, wanting freedom. As he walked through narrow streets, he felt eyes watching him. Suddenly, thieves surrounded him. They took his money and pushed him to the ground before running away. The prince lay there, shocked and humiliated. No one recognized him as royalty. Passers-by ignored him, assuming he was just another unlucky traveler. Pain and fear overwhelmed him. Finally, Rahim found him. The old servant helped the prince stand and cleaned the dirt from his face. There was no anger in Rahim's eyes, only concern. For the first time, the prince felt truly seen as a human being, not a ruler. That night, the prince could not sleep. He thought about how powerless he had been, how easily his status disappeared. He remembered the honest boy in the market and the old woman who once helped him without knowing his identity. Slowly, his understanding began to change. The following days of the journey were different. The prince started helping the servants. He carried water, held tents, and shared meals on the ground. His hands blistered, his back ached, but his heart felt lighter. The servants watched in disbelief, then in quiet admiration. Rahim spoke to the prince often now. He told stories of his youth, of working long hours and losing family members, of learning patience and dignity without wealth. The prince listened carefully. He realized that wisdom did not come from gold or titles, but from experience and humility. When the journey ended and the palace gates appeared in the distance, the prince felt nervous. He wondered if his change would disappear once comfort returned. But he made a silent promise to himself. Back in the palace, the prince gathered the servants. He spoke openly, admitting his past arrogance. He said he had learned that respect could not be forced and that leadership meant service to others. Many servants were moved by his honesty. From that day forward, the prince ruled differently. He worked alongside his people during difficult times. He listened before judging. He rewarded honesty and kindness instead of fear and obedience. The palace became a place of cooperation, not tension. Years later, people remembered him not as the prince who commanded loudly, but as the ruler who learned to bow his head. His greatest strength was no longer authority, but humility. Through his journey and the guidance of his servants, especially Rahim, the prince discovered that true power begins with understanding others.